Whether we like it or not, email is a popular form of communication in professional and academic settings. And so I'm going to share some advice, and there are lots of sources for this advice, so I encourage you to consider those other sources and other recommendations of information and guidance for sending emails. And the content and style of an email, particularly as I mentioned in academic or professional setting, represents you and should receive some thought and attention before you send those emails. And I think part of where there's some difficulty is there's often a blurry line between our various forms of communication, from text messaging to social media to email to various other platforms. We access those typically on the same device. However, in an academic and professional setting, brevity and informality can be interpreted differently by different people. So it's important to think about that context, think about your relationship, and also your and their communication preferences. Typically, the more you know someone and the more closely you work with them, the more informal you can get. But depending on rank and organization and other relationships, you may consider to be more formal in some of those situations. And so, again, there really aren't going to be hard and fast rules for a lot of things. Some of these recommendations I think will be good in many contexts, but may also not be needed everywhere. So this guidance I'm going to share is primarily based on an academic setting with a professor, but I think also applies very well in a professional setting. Also, it isn't meant to imply that every single email you sent must be completely formal, but you should consider that audience and the subject matter as you're preparing that email. Writing effectively does not simply mean following all the rules. It means effective writing means that you're using writing as that act of human communication, and your words should be shaped in light of whom you're writing to and why. And we see these regularly, that this was I went to a meeting that should have been an email, and then often there's also emails that should have been a meeting or an in-person discussion. So think about that context. Email may not be always the best form. Often talking in person or a phone call can do wonders from making sure you express your ideas effectively. So first and foremost, you should make sure you include the relevant individuals. Depending on the content of the email, it may be appropriate in some circumstances to carbon copy individuals, and that could be in an academic setting. It could be a TA for the class. It could be your group study members, your project team. Similarly, in a professional setting, it may be your important colleagues or supervisors that want to see this message and that the information is going out. So think about who should be on that email. Carbon copying, use blind carbon copying, the BCC, use that carefully. Somebody may respond to it that you weren't intending, but you may also use the BCC occasionally as well. A big one for me is the subject line. It should be clear. So if it's a homework question, using the course name, so CE 403 homework 2 radius measurement is much better than help or question, and those are even better than a blank subject line. So make sure you have a subject, make sure it's relevant. Sometimes emails the discussion and thread can change over time as emails go back and forth. So I do encourage people to change that subject line if it's deviated substantially from the original email and purpose of that. So think about that subject line, but please don't leave it blank. Please put something there. The more information you can put there is better. Oftentimes people read an email and then don't respond immediately, and it helps them find that email later when they're going back through it. Again, the course number in the subject is really helpful for us finding an email if we're checking it while we're walking somewhere or only have a few minutes to read it but not respond. It can help us then find that email later on. Next, using a salutation and a signature. So for the salutation, this is the beginning. I do have a colleague who told me that they got an email from a student saying, "Hey, buddy," and that's probably not the right way to start an email in a professor-student type of relationship. It may be, though, if you have that relationship and you're confident in that may be something, but I would say use extreme caution with that. The same for a supervisor in a professional setting. Something like hello or good afternoon is fine, good morning. If you want to use titles, if you're comfortable with that person's titles, if they prefer doctor or professor or something else. That can be tricky, though, depending on the instructor's rank and level of education. Same for the professional setting as well. Professors usually a safe bet in an academic college setting, but that's something that you have to get used to and figure that out. But something hello, good afternoon, good morning, those almost always work and are clear and professional enough. On the salutation side, often we see a lot of things that say sent from my iPhone. To me, that's not an excuse for poor grammar and punctuation. So if it's an important email that needs to be formal, you need to make sure you are using correct punctuation and not ending on that sent from my cell phone. Usually use the signature best or sincerely or regards followed by your name and some other information. This somewhat ties in the beginning of emails as well. A lot of times I'll see an email that says, hello, my name is such and such. Well, if you put that in your salutation, you don't have to put your name there in the first sentence of your email. Along those lines, using standard punctuation, capitalization, spelling, and grammar is important. I know we can be accessing these on our same device, but this isn't a text message, so using shorthand in a text message is fine, but in the email, you should write that out more thoroughly. So just think about how you're conveying that information and using full information there. Another big thing that I really encourage people to do is make sure you're doing your part to solve what you need to solve. So exhaust those resources. So if you send an email and it's something you could have and most likely should have looked up on your own, you risk presenting yourself as less resourceful than you ought to. And so it is important. I love when I see an email from someone and they say, this is everything I've done. I've checked the syllabus. I've checked the course website. I've asked classmates. I looked through the lecture notes. I can't find what I'm looking for. So you want to present yourself as responsible, as taking initiatives. You've looked in the textbook. You maybe looked in other professional references. So instead of asking, what's our homework for tonight? You might say, I looked through the syllabus and the course website for this weekend's assigned homework, but unfortunately I'm unable to locate it. So it's still the same message, but you're saying these are the things I've tried and I couldn't find them. So you've done your part. You didn't just start with an email. You actually took some time to solve that problem on your own. Next, we have to think about the concerns of making assumptions. Rightly or wrongly, many professors feel that students make assumptions about flexibility in the same way in a professional setting that a supervisor may assume that new employees may make assumptions about the flexibility with deadlines or other aspects of work or the course in particular. So if you appear to demand help or shrug off absences or assume late work will be accepted without penalty because you have a good reason, your professors may actually see that as irresponsible or presumptuous. So even if it's true that the printer wasn't working, and if you really need to make a certain grade in the class, your email is going to be more effective if you take some responsibility for that. So, go ahead and say, I didn't plan ahead well enough, and I accept whatever policies you have for late work. In the professional setting, the concerns about assumptions and entitlement may also be present, and those deadlines will be expected to be met whether or not there's any hurdles in the way, such as malfunctioning printers or crashed computers. Murphy's Law is very consistent. If you have an assignment that's due and you're waiting to the last minute to submit it, it's very likely that the internet goes out, the power goes out, something crashes. So keep that in mind and work ahead, think ahead to avoid some of those concerns and those impacts. But if that happens to you, I do think it's best to go ahead and admit what happened and take responsibility for those actions and not be seen as making assumptions about what can happen or what the recourse is. Next, you should also organize your thoughts and questions. This is especially important if you have a lot of questions. Your email is going to be most effective if you can clearly communicate your specific questions. If you have similar questions, you should group them. And to me, if you have more than 2 questions in an email, you should number them if you expect a response, or put them separately. I'll often get an email that's a long paragraph and it's 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 questions, and even I can't distinguish the difference between some questions and some statements. It's difficult for a professor or a colleague to respond to that effectively. So go ahead and put that numbering in place. Make sure you clearly organize your thoughts and your questions, and I think that'll help in the response from your recipient of the email. I hope these tips have been helpful. Of course, there's many other helpful tips. If you have something that I didn't mention, please mention it in the comments below. Always looking to learn on tips and tricks that you may have.